The Galactic Council had faced the same problem for over 3,000 years. Every species in the known universe struggled with one simple truth. Leaders were born, not made. At least, that was what everyone believed until the humans arrived. Ambassador stood before the massive viewing screen in his chamber on Station Prime. His four arms were crossed in frustration as he watched yet another planetary conflict unfold on the colony world of Seven. The young governor there had failed spectacularly. Riots filled the streets. Trade had collapsed. Millions of credits worth of goods rotted in warehouses because nobody could organize the workers anymore. It was the same story across 100 worlds. The old leaders were dying. The young ones who replaced them lacked wisdom. They lacked vision. They lacked the ability to inspire loyalty in their followers. The Galactic Council had tried everything. They had created leadership academies on dozens of planets. They had written thousands of books about command and authority. They had even attempted genetic modifications to breed better leaders. Nothing worked. Then the humans made contact. At first, nobody paid much attention to the small blue planet on the edge of the Orion Arm. The humans had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. They were laughably short. Most species lived for 500 years or more. Humans rarely saw 100. But something strange happened when humans started working alongside other species. Their ships ran more smoothly. Their trading posts became more profitable. Their colonies avoided the conflicts that plagued everyone else. The Galactic Council sent observers to find out why. What they discovered changed everything. Doctor was a scientist assigned to study the human settlement on station. She had 4 eyes, green scales, and 300 years of research experience. She arrived expecting to find nothing unusual. She left 6 months later with a complete reorganization of her own understanding of social dynamics. The humans did something no other species had ever thought to do. They trained their leaders, not through books or lectures or genetic programs. They trained them through something they called mentorship. An experienced leader would take a younger individual under their guidance. They would share meals together. They would work side by side. The older one would explain not just what decisions to make, but why those decisions mattered. They would share their failures as openly as their successes. It seemed too simple to work, but it did work remarkably well. Doctor watched a human named transform a struggling supply depot into the most efficient operation in 3 sectors. Was 62 years old. By human standards, she was approaching the end of her career. By galactic standards, she was practically an infant. Yet she had already trained 7 other humans who now led their own successful operations. The secret explained was time. You had to invest time in people. You had to sit with them when they made mistakes. You had to celebrate with them when they succeeded. You had to let them fail sometimes, then help them understand why they failed. Leadership was not something you could download into someone's brain. It had to grow naturally, like a plant reaching toward sunlight. Ambassador read Doctor report 17 times. He called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The proposal was radical. The council would hire human mentors to train young leaders across the galaxy. The humans would be given resources, status, and protection. In exchange, they would share their methods with every species willing to learn. Many council members objected. How could such a primitive species teach anything to civilizations that had existed for? The representative called it an insult. The delegation walked out in protest, but Ambassador showed them the numbers. Human-led organizations outperformed others by 300%. Human-trained leaders had a failure rate of only 12%, compared to the galactic average of 67%. The vote passed narrowly. The Human Mentor Initiative was born. 5 years later, everything had changed. Young stood in the cargo bay of the mining vessel, his massive frame trembling with frustration. He was a species known for their incredible strength and equally incredible tempers. His predecessor had died in an accident 3 months ago, and had been promoted to shift supervisor. He hated every moment of it. His human mentor, a small man named David Park, sat on a crate nearby. David was 71 years old with gray hair and wrinkled skin. He weighed perhaps one-fifth what did, yet somehow his presence made feel calmer. The miners were fighting again. Two crews had gotten into a dispute over equipment, wanted to bang their heads together and force them to work. That was what his previous supervisor had always done. It was the way, but David had asked him to wait. David suggested something different. He asked to speak with each crew separately, not to demand answers but to listen, really listen, find out what they actually needed, not what they said they wanted. Thought it was a waste of time, but he trusted David, so he tried. 3 hours later, discovered the truth. Both crews were exhausted. They had been working double shifts for weeks because the company had not hired enough workers. They were not fighting over equipment. They were fighting because they were tired and scared, and nobody had bothered to ask how they were doing. Went to the station manager and demanded more workers. He used the evidence he had gathered. He presented it calmly, without threatening anyone. The manager, surprised by this diplomatic approach, agreed immediately. That night, asked David how he had known. David smiled and told him a story about his own first leadership position. He had been 25, running a small construction team on Earth. He had faced the exact same problem. His mentor, a woman named, had taught him the same lesson. People usually fought about small things when they were really upset about big things. A good leader dug deeper. Listened carefully. He asked questions. He realized that David was not just teaching him techniques. David was sharing his life. His experiences became part of his understanding. It was like gaining decades of wisdom without having to live through all those years. This was the human gift. They lived short lives, but they compressed enormous amounts of learning into those years, and they were eager to pass that learning on. They saw it as their duty, their purpose. A human who retired without training a successor felt like they had failed, regardless of their other achievements. Across the galaxy, similar transformations were taking place. On the planet, a young named Shimmering Waters struggled with her role as village leader. Her species communicated through color changes in their translucent skin. They had never had strong central leadership. Decisions were made through slow consensus that could take months. Her human mentor was a former schoolteacher named James Wright. He was 83 years old and walked with a cane, but his mind was sharp and his patience was endless. He spent 6 months simply observing culture before offering any advice. When he finally spoke, his suggestion was simple. They did not need to abandon their consensus system. They needed to improve it. James taught Shimmering Waters how to guide discussions without controlling them. He showed her how to identify common ground between opposing views. He explained how to break large problems into smaller pieces that could be solved one at a time. Within 2 years, Shimmering Waters had reduced the average decision time in her village from 3 months to 2 weeks. Other villages sent observers to learn from her. She began training her own apprentices, adapting the human mentorship model to culture. The Galactic Council noticed these successes. They expanded the program. More human mentors were recruited. Training centers were established on 100 worlds. The curriculum evolved to include not just leadership skills, but the philosophy behind those skills. Ambassador gave a speech at the 10-year anniversary of the initiative. He spoke about what the galaxy had learned from humanity. The humans had revealed a fundamental truth that other species had missed. Leadership was not about power or authority or genetic superiority. Leadership was about service. A true leader existed to help others succeed. This concept revolutionized galactic society. Species that had dominated others for centuries began to question their methods. Empires that relied on force started experimenting with cooperation. Those who had once opposed the initiative most strongly became its greatest supporters after human mentors helped resolve a civil war that had lasted for generations. But the most significant change was harder to measure. It happened in quiet moments, in cargo bays and village squares and office buildings across the galaxy. It happened whenever an experienced leader sat down with a young person and said, "Let me tell you about my mistakes." Now 87, visited Station Prime for the anniversary celebration. She had personally trained over 40 leaders who had gone on to train hundreds more. Her methods had spread across 7 sectors, yet she seemed uncomfortable with the praise. A young reporter asked her what she considered her greatest achievement, thought for a moment, then pointed to a standing nearby. It was, now a senior executive in the mining consortium. He was explaining something to a young worker, using his hands to illustrate a point. The young worker's face lit up with understanding. That said, that was her greatest achievement, not her own success, but the success of those she had taught, and more importantly, the success of those they would teach in turn. The chain of mentorship extending forward through time, each generation adding its own wisdom to the collective knowledge. The human had always seemed like a weakness. Other species them for their brief existence. But the humans had turned that weakness into strength. Because they knew their time was limited, they felt urgency to share what they had learned. They could not afford to hoard knowledge. They had to give it away before it was too late. Ambassador watched the celebration with all 4 of his eyes. He thought about the future. The galaxy would face new challenges. Wars would come. Disasters would strike. Resources would run short. But now, for the first time in 3,000 years, he felt genuine hope. The next generation of leaders was being trained, not in academies or laboratories, but in the real world by mentors who cared about their success. The humans had taught the galaxy something precious. True leadership was not about commanding others. It was about investing in them, believing in them, helping them grow. And growth, as any human could tell you, took time and patience and love. Those were resources that even the richest empire could not buy. They had to be given freely. The humans had shown the galaxy how to give. Now the galaxy was learning to give back. Young aliens were beginning to mentor each other, adapting the human methods to their own cultures. The initiative had become self-sustaining. It would continue long after the original human mentors were gone. That perhaps was the greatest lesson of all. A good leader built something that outlasted their own lifetime. They planted trees whose shade they would never enjoy. They trained successors who would surpass them. Finished his conversation with the young worker. He turned and caught eye across the room. He bowed deeply, a gesture of respect he had learned from David Park all those years ago. Bowed back. 2 species, 2 generations, one unbroken chain of wisdom passed from hand to hand, from heart to heart, across the vast distances of space and time. This was humanity's true gift to the galaxy. Not technology, not resources, not military strength. Hope, connection. The simple, powerful act of one person helping another become better than they thought possible. The galaxy had invested in human mentors. The return on that investment would last forever.